One miscommunication away from nuclear annihilation.
AI predictions about the end of humanity are beginning to unfold at an alarming rate. As these grim forecasts circulate, panic spreads and society grapples with the unsettling possibility that our days might be numbered. From nuclear war to climate catastrophes, AI models warn that the apocalypse may already be upon us. What do these models predict our outcome will be? How did we get here? And is there any hope left?
Number 1. Nuclear war. Since the dark days of the Cold War, when world powers flexed their military might in the pursuit of power, control, and dominance, the threat of a nuclear holocaust has been looming over our world, and according to artificial intelligence, we may be closer to burning down the planet with massive bombs than at any other point in history. Imagine a catastrophic event occurs today, and every corner of the world is plunged into utter nuclear desolation. What are your chances of surviving the explosions, radiation, and nuclear winter? Is this really a feasible scenario in the grand scheme of things, or just another fictional narrative that's eaten deep into our minds? According to researchers, the threat of a nuclear holocaust is one of the most prevalent scenarios that could trigger the end of the world as we know it. The scariest part, however, is that it doesn't matter who starts the war. As soon as one side of the conflict launches nuclear missiles, the other sides would instinctively detect the bomb in the sky and fire counter weapons. So, it's most definitely a lose-lose situation. Missiles from the United States submarines west of Norway would start striking Russia in just about 10 minutes, and Russia would fire from north of Canada into the United States territory within a few minutes. Upon impact, the first strike would most definitely create an electromagnetic pulse as powerful as tens of thousands of volts per meter, destroying all electronics and power plants. The next set of strikes would hit command and control centers of nuclear launch facilities to prevent reprisal attacks. Major cities will be targeted. 1, because they contain military and government facilities essential for the continued survival of the nations at war. And 2, because they're harder to rebuild in the post-war era. Every single impact will create a fireball as hot as the sun's core, and the intensity of the explosions will be powerful enough to vaporize the people within the vicinity of the blast, while blinding those further away and setting some on fire. Buildings will be leveled to the ground, entire neighborhoods will turn to dust, and anyone who isn't locked away in a nuclear bunker hundreds of feet underground will most likely die a quick but painful death. But beyond the horrors of the electromagnetic pulse, explosions, and radioactivity, the true killer of the human race would come later. After the embers of the nuclear blast die down, the world would then be plunged into a terrible nuclear winter caused by the black carbon smoke from the nuclear firestorms. According to a recent scientific paper, over 5 billion people would starve to death, and our civilization may eventually burn to ashes. Number 2, climate change. But what if the destruction of the human race doesn't come from a big bomb or a nuclear holocaust? What if the planet itself becomes so uninhabitable that it destroys everything living and breathing? Enter the climate change theory. You see, back in 2023, a group of scientists published a study in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, predicting that our planet will likely breach the climate change threshold internationally agreed upon within the next decade, and the Earth will keep heating to break through a next warming limit around mid-century. According to artificial intelligence, this end appears unavoidable, regardless of big pollution cuts or any serious policy changes. Using machine learning, these scientists calculated that the Earth will surpass the 1.5-degree mark between 2033 and 2035, coinciding with other reports suggesting that the doom may come earlier than expected. But could the effects of climate change become the final straw that will wipe out the entire human race and everything living and breathing? Going by the report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there might still be hope for humanity. On one hand, there exists a looming threat of an extinction-level event triggered by climate change. But on the other hand, scientists believe that the chances of human extinction are very low, if not zero. Thanks to the progress made in recent years by switching to clean energy and controlling our greenhouse gas emissions, we are slowly moving away from the worst-case scenario to a more mild premonition. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean that we are in the clear. Even in the best-case scenario, many people would still be impacted by catastrophic climate events. There will be heat waves that will wipe out both plants and animals, droughts that will destroy farmlands and put the agricultural sector at risk. And while a percentage of the world's population will bear the brunt of these devastating events, extinction seems to be a distant possibility. Sea levels will rise, and island nations of the world will be flooded, pushing the population further inward, as many abandon their homeland for safer regions. Low-lying coastal areas facing 2 or 3 feet of sea level rise will suffer greatly in this predicted future, from the wealthy streets of Miami to the impoverished regions of Kiribati. While wealthy nations possess enough resources to prepare for doomsday, the poorest populations are placed at an automatic disadvantage. Vulnerable and too impoverished to cushion the effects of the impending disaster, many lives will be lost on a larger scale than the world has ever seen. Agricultural lands will be lost to flooding, and food supplies will be depleted at an alarming rate. Societies will descend into chaos, and our world will suffer one of its most brutal breakdowns in recorded history. But will humanity survive this crisis? Most likely. Number 3. Global pandemic. In the year 2020, our world was shaken to its core by a global pandemic that threatened our continued existence. We survived. It wasn't the first time the entire world would be thrown into chaos by the outbreak of a widespread deadly disease, but it remains one of the most devastating, killing over 7 million people and paralyzing the global economy. But the future could hold even more grim possibilities. ChatGPT recently revealed in 2023 that our planet is closer to another global pandemic than we realize. Could the spread of a disease deadlier than the coronavirus bring an end to our existence as a race? For years, scientists and medical researchers have attempted to predict what the next big pandemic could be. Over the millennium, humanity has weathered several storms, battled terrifying outbreaks, and prevented the spread of diseases that could threaten our species. But what comes next might just be too deadly to survive. Thanks to COVID-19, many have become more aware of the risks associated with a pandemic, with countries around the world declaring mandatory stay-at-home measures, closing schools and businesses, and halting all social activities. Inarguably, the pandemic led to a massive loss of lives and a disruption of normalcy in our world. But on the brighter side, it also prepared us for what could be if Earth was ever hit by another pandemic. However, this wasn't the first time humanity survived a global disease outbreak. Between 1346 and 1353, a deadly disease known as the bubonic plague, or the Black Death, ravaged regions of Europe, Africa, and Asia, killing between 75 to 200 million people. Historians claim that the plague came from Asia and was subsequently transmitted from one continent to the other by fleas living on the rats that lived aboard merchant ships. As these ships docked in new cities, the rats infested the locals, and then came death. But even with our archaic medical practices, humanity managed to survive. Earlier in the year 541 AD, another pandemic known as the Plague of Justinian also ravaged Europe. Arising from the same bubonic plague that caused the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian broke out in the Byzantine Empire and Mediterranean port cities, killing up to 25 million people in a year, devastating the ancient city of Constantinople, where 5,000 people died every day, and wiping out half the population of Europe. No one can truly predict where the next pandemic will arise from, but the result may rival our historical records and possibly trigger the apocalypse that will lead to the eventual end of the world. Number 4. Artificial intelligence. Since the invention of the first computer, doomsayers have made thousands of predictions, projecting the end of our species at the hands of our own creations. As the world of artificial intelligence continues to grow at an alarming rate, and machines get smarter and smarter, this sci-fi plotline may end up becoming reality. But how exactly would AI destroy us even if it wanted to? Scientists predict three major scenarios. First, if the human species ever becomes the less intelligent species, we should expect to be wiped out. This wouldn't be the first time in history that a species will be destroyed by a smarter species. Humans, for example, have been responsible for the disappearance of many less intelligent species, including the more recent example, the West African black rhinoceros, which was officially declared extinct in 2011. By constantly depleting the rainforest and infringing on their habitat for our own benefits, as well as hunting down these rhinos for food and their supposed aphrodisiac properties, humanity ensured the total extinction of this species. So, what happens when artificially intelligent robots emerge in our world and we slowly recede to the background as they become the most intelligent species on the planet? Humans could become pests in our own homes, and if AI robots ever plan to rearrange the biosphere and make it incompatible with human life, this could be our end as a race. Secondly, AI could wipe us out to prevent us from building another superintelligent being, capable of challenging its supremacy as the most advanced species on the planet. Since it will be smarter than us, it will inevitably be able to get anything it wants, and to avoid its supremacy getting toppled by another human creation, the extinction of the human race may be the only means to guarantee its continued dominance. So it may kill us to save itself. However, the most plausible scenario is to imagine that a person or an organization employs the use of AI to destroy the rest of the world. According to many researchers, intelligent robots will be a staple of our society within the next decade, and they could then be utilized by notorious groups to carry out deadly attacks on world leaders and large human populations, slaying us faster than the most powerful armies can. If the fight ever becomes man versus machine, there could be little to no hope of survival for the human race. Number 5. Ecological collapse. Our planet operates on a delicate balance of natural resources, all of which are maintained in perfect symphony to ensure our continued existence. But what happens when this balance tips over and the other species on the planet gradually disappears? Scientists believe this marks the beginning of an extinction event. Unfortunately, the process has already been kickstarted. Findings revealed that the current losses of biodiversity recorded around the world today will eventually lead to an inevitable loss of all lives on Earth. This, however, would not be the first time. Some 252 million years ago, Earth experienced the Permian-Triassic extinction event, also known as the Great Dying, where global heating wiped out 95% of life on Earth. However, scientists believe that the rate of extinction today is way higher than in any of the previous mass extinctions that have occurred since the inception of the Earth. As of today, millions of wildlife are being wiped out by human activity, as farmers and loggers desecrate rainforests for profit, miners destroy the ecosystem to harvest natural resources, and hunters plunder our wildlife. Considering how humanity relies heavily on a healthy global ecosystem for clean air and water, as well as food, their destruction could also eventually lead to our destruction. We don't see it, but a healthy ecosystem depends on the complex cooperative system of all members, both plants and animals, and the gradual decline would invariably lead to total collapse of the ecosystem. Predators depend on prey, prey depends on the forest, and humans depend on the recycling process of photosynthesis to maintain the continuous cycle of life. By studying the events that preceded the Great Dying, scientists discovered that half the species went into extinction with virtually no change in the overall functioning of the ecosystem, because some creatures still remained in each role. But as soon as the last species in each role completely died out, the system collapsed rapidly. Although scientists believe we are in the first phase of an extinction event, the horrid days are still far ahead, and it seems nothing can be done to reverse this process. Number 6. Asteroid Impact. After dominating the Earth as the most powerful species for 160 million years, dinosaurs met their end some 66 million years ago after a huge space rock hit the Earth with unparalleled force, signifying the end of the world as they knew it. While such a dramatic event has not been recorded for millions of years now, there is a chance that a similar occurrence could ultimately mark the end of the human race on planet Earth, and for good reasons. But beyond the threat of wiping out an entire race, what are the odds that the Earth itself would one day be hit by an asteroid so large it would shatter to pieces? To predict the future, we should look at the past. The asteroid that wiped out the dinosaur was said to have measured at least 6 miles across, which means we're looking at something much bigger than that. How big, though? Well, maybe as big as Mars. According to the Toon hypothesis, scientists believe that some 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth collided with a Mars-sized planet called Theia, launching a bunch of rocky debris into space to form our moon. But instead of completely obliterating the Earth, parts of Theia's core and mantle fused with our own, remaining underfoot for millions of years until the first life evolved from our planet. So, if Theia didn't destroy the Earth in its infancy, what will? We've already been hit by several massive asteroids, including the 66-foot-wide space rock, which struck the city of Chelyabinsk, Russia, back in February 2013. For context, that's the size of a whole tennis court. Earlier in 1908, another 156-foot-wide asteroid, the size of an Olympic swimming pool, exploded around Tunguska in eastern Siberia. The impact destroyed 80 million trees, and eyewitnesses described a tremor that was so massive it threw people into the air. No one knows what could come next, as asteroid impacts are often unpredictable. But if an asteroid either as big or larger than the dinosaur killer strikes the planet, it could trigger the end of the world, and maybe the demise of our planet itself. Number 7. Biotechnology. Since the days of the World Wars, countries around the world have been working to develop terrifyingly effective chemical weapons capable of eliminating their enemies in mass numbers, and it's probably the most dangerous wartime venture in the history of mankind. As Winston Churchill remarked in 1925, scientists have developed blight to destroy crops, anthrax to slay horses and cattle, plague to poison not armies only, but whole districts. For some, this marked a much-needed shift in the way we fight wars, eliminating the risk of losing more men in battle, for the aggressors at least. But for others, this is unethical in every sense of the word, as it crosses the bounds of morality that should never be infringed upon in any conflict. In reality, the use of these biological weapons has been very rare and mostly small-scale, and over the last several decades, programs dedicated to its development have been scrapped, and no nation in the world is currently pursuing biological weapons, at least not openly. But if history has taught us anything, it's that nothing is ever truly banned, and many nations own weapons they don't officially possess. With the increasing tension in our society today, we could be looking at a total breakdown in just a few years, maybe even less than a decade. According to predictions made by artificial technology, there may come a time in our history when every corner of the Earth will become engulfed in a massive war, prompting the reintroduction of these biological weapons. That's not all, though. Over the years, several new biological weapons have been developed, capable of far more destruction and horrors than the chemical agents of World War II. Considering how the materials needed to develop biological weapons are relatively easy to obtain, the nightmarish possibility of large-scale chemical and biological warfare may be more real than we'd like to admit. If this ever happens, and a nation decides to drop tons of chemical agents on enemy nations, we could find ourselves in an apocalyptic situation that will rival the scenes of a sci-fi movie. Number 8. Supervolcano eruption. Besides the threats of humans wiping themselves off the face of the Earth, what if the Earth itself decides to kick us out? Ever heard of a supervolcano? Well, on the outside, they don't look exactly like you might expect. Mount St. Helens or Eyjafjallajökull, for example, are actually small craters compared to the enormous amount of lava deposited within their core. However, the big question about supervolcanoes isn't about whether they could destroy all life on Earth, but when it will happen again. When it eventually happens, it won't be the first time. Scientists believe that some 200 million years ago, a supervolcano erupted with such intense energy that 75% of the species on Earth were all eradicated. The impact was so severe that it pulled apart North America and Africa, creating the Atlantic Ocean between them. For 600,000 years, the supervolcano known as Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, or CAMP, erupted over and over. But just because you don't live around this volcano or any other region with volcanic activity doesn't essentially mean you will escape the impact of this eruption. This is because, in reality, it wasn't the lava that killed everything, nor the volcanic ash raining down from the skies. Rather, it was the fallout resulting from the event. Carbon dioxide and carbon levels exploded instantly, the environment was completely destroyed, and the entire planet was thrown into a massive apocalypse. It was from the ashes of this burnt-down world that the dinosaurs arose. Right underneath Yellowstone Park, in the western section of the United States, lies a whole caldera of lava measuring 55 by 20 miles and stretching for 3 to 5 miles below the surface. If this volcano ever explodes, the impact would be 25,000 times bigger than Mount St. Helens, and while the lava flow and ash would undoubtedly lead to millions of deaths, it is the global cooling that will follow that'll eventually wipe out all life forms on our planet. Number 9. Nanotechnology. Humans have always been scared of the big unknowns, the massive cataclysmic events, earthquakes, nuclear fallouts, volcanic eruptions. But what if the end of our species is destined to come by the hands of tiny nanobots? This is where gray goo comes in. By definition, gray goo is a nightmarish scenario emerging from the field of nanotechnology, where rogue, self-replicating nanobots would unite to destroy the Earth's biosphere by producing millions and billions of replicas of themselves and feeding on all the materials needed for life. The term gray goo was coined by American engineer Eric Drexler in his book Engines of Creation, released in 1986, and it's definitely one of the most terrifying scenarios of the end of the world. For decades, scientific optimists have lauded the positive possibilities of these self-replicating machines, proposing that molecular-level assemblers could solve the world's energy crisis through the use of low-cost solar power and even cure diseases like cancer by boosting the human immune system. Maybe they could even help us clean up the climate. But what happens if these nanobots ever turn against mankind? Since these nanoassemblers are self-replicating, they could easily form unstoppable armies and subsequently eat up our ecosystem. Consequently, this would lead to a total breakdown of the Earth's biosphere, leading to an even more disturbing end than the other end of the world scenarios. Number 10. Overpopulation. Are there too many people on this planet? Is the Earth really overpopulated? It's a question that sometimes triggers a political response. But in reality, the risk of the Earth getting overpopulated is a real threat that could eventually lead to the end of the human race. In the fall of 2022, the global population surpassed 8 billion people, a mark that had never been passed in the history of the planet. 11 years before that, in 2011, there were only 7 billion people on the planet, and experts estimate that by 2050, we could reach a peak in population growth. Every single year, about 80 million people, roughly the population of Germany, is added to the Earth, and the number has been growing every year since then. Why is this a problem, though? Well, according to scientists, population growth is one of the biggest drivers of carbon emissions. As of 2022, carbon emissions on our planet have risen to almost 38 billion tons, an increase of about 16 billion tons since 1988, when the United States and other countries began taking climate change seriously. Then there's the risk of depleting the fossil fuel supply of the Earth as the population grows more rapidly. While it is highly unlikely that the Earth's population will ever grow to a point where the planet will be unable to sustain life any longer, it's still a possibility that many scientists choose not to ignore. Number 11. Gamma-ray burst. Our planet is constantly surrounded by rays and emissions like the gamma rays, weightless, high-energy packets of electromagnetic radiation. Unlike visible lights, which can comfortably illuminate a room, gamma rays can penetrate concrete and could also cause serious damage to the human body they pass through. Of course, humans are not exactly under the threat of being blasted by gamma rays. However, there is one particular cosmic phenomenon that could tilt the delicate balance of our planet, and it's called gamma-ray bursts. Within just a few seconds, a gamma-ray burst releases more energy than our sun is capable of generating in its entire lifetime, and is capable of producing a catastrophic energy projectile. But the big question is, where does it come from? You see, to produce a gamma-ray burst, you need a powerful explosion, the type that results from a star's collapse. As stars age, they slowly burn through the fuel that keeps them from collapsing in on themselves due to their gravity. But at the end of their lifespan, gravity wins, and the hot ball of gas is condensed into a hotter ball of gas, eventually collapsing in on itself. This will result in a violent implosion, producing a titanic blast known as a supernova, as well as a black hole denser than anything else in the known universe. This will also result in the release of a massive gamma-ray burst, which could potentially vaporize everything on Earth and the planet itself. If one of these events occurs 200 light-years away from Earth and is aimed at the right angle, this theoretical event could become reality, and our world would come to a swift and shocking end before we even figure out what's going on. It could also destroy our ozone layer, exposing us to deadly radiation from space and transforming the Earth into a desolate wasteland. Number 12. Geomagnetic reversal. Since the birth of our planet, geomagnetic pole reversal effects have held this space rock together, but it could also trigger the end of the Earth as a habitable planet. What makes this even scarier is the fact that the pole reversal, which would be responsible for this catastrophe, has happened a couple of times in the past, and scientists can't figure out when the next one might be. According to scientific analysis, the Earth has been rocked by this geomagnetic reversal every 500,000 years, within the past 200 million years. With the last reversal recorded some 780,000 years ago, many researchers believe we're due for another flip. So what would happen if the magnetic poles suddenly reversed and the South Pole and North Poles switched positions? Compass needles would go wrong, and animals like birds, salmon, sea turtles, whales, and butterflies reliant on the magnetic field for navigation would get temporarily disoriented. That's not the worst part. Scientists believe that such a reversal could also destroy anything electronic, including home appliances, satellites, wireless devices, and even electric grids. The ripple effect of this could lead to serious damage on the Earth's inhabitants, although our chances of survival are still pretty high. Number 13. Economic collapse. In recent years, countries around the world have been plagued by serious economic meltdowns of different proportions. Could this signal the end of the world, though? Some experts believe so. Economic collapse is often characterized by prolonged depression with high bankruptcy rates and high unemployment, to a breakdown in normal commerce caused by hyperinflation. This could lead to a decline in the population, like in the case of the former USSR back in the 1990s, as well as a sharp rise in death rate. With economic collapse comes hunger, famine, and a host of other factors that could destabilize the community and thrust its people into dire need. When the value of the currency drops drastically, and even middle-class citizens struggle to procure basic needs, this could signify the beginning of the end. We've seen it happen during the Great Depression, as well as the devaluation of the German currency following the war. But could something of that nature be replicated on a global scale? To be honest, that's highly unlikely. If an economic collapse would trigger the end of the world, it wouldn't be a solitary factor, but a confluence of other related or unrelated events, pushing our society into the dark depths of death and despair, where there may be no hope of recovery. Number 14. Alien invasion. With more than 100 Hollywood blockbusters depicting this widespread narrative, the idea that the end of our planet will come at the hands of an alien invasion is perhaps the most popular Armageddon scenario ever conceived. But according to a recently published report, this may not be a baseless conspiracy after all. Scientists believe that the rising greenhouse emissions on our planet could tip off our alien neighbors that we're a rapidly expanding threat, forcing them to wipe us out before we destroy everything else. Watching from afar, these aliens supposedly monitor the changes in our atmosphere, as well as the effects of these changes on the rest of the neighboring planets. If things ever got so bad that other parts of the solar system got threatened by our activities on the planet, we could then be visited by an extraterrestrial army whose sole mission is to destroy us, and maybe our planet as well in the process. Yes, this is a highly speculative scenario, but it still can't be ruled out, considering the undeniable evidence confirming the existence of these extraterrestrial beings. We've been visited by them several times, they've crash-landed on our soil, and there have also been countless unexplained encounters. So it's a no-brainer that our extraterrestrial neighbors may be keeping an eye on the changes in our atmosphere. There's also a chance that the harm done to humanity may be accidental and unintended, although that also sounds very unlikely. If, in the near future, humanity comes in contact with a hostile extraterrestrial species with more powerful technology and bigger weapons that we possess, it could very well be the final straw that drives mankind to extinction. Will that ever happen, though? We'll have to wait and see. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.